I'm Nayaswami Jaya, and I've met, I suspect, almost all of you. And I welcome you to this study group that we're going to have in the weeks ahead. I don't know how many sessions this is going to take, but it could go on a while. Of course, who knows? Maybe we'll go through this quite quickly if it becomes repetitive, but I don't think it will, because there's a lot of interesting material in what we're going to be discussing, which is the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And we'll get into this this first week. I'll give a little background on this and what we're going to do, and we'll set the tone a little about what we're going to be doing coming up in the weeks ahead. And I would, so if you have your book handy, please keep it handy, and we'll move together through this. Now, every week, what I'd like to do is I'd like us to begin by, we'll start with also natural, I'll begin soon with the prayer, and we'll have a chant, and then we'll sit and meditate for maybe 5 minutes, not much more than that. And then we'll proceed with our book study group. And then today, after we do that, I'll explain a little bit further of how we might proceed with this and some suggestions. And I suspect as we go forward, since this is something I've never done a book study about, the Rubaiyat. I've read the book a few times, a couple of times, but I think this is an experiment for all of us, because it's, as you've probably read by now, it's a deep and mysterious book, and it's not always obvious, and the symbolism that's used is sometimes obscure, but I think that should make it fun, and something that's a little bit challenging. So I can see more and more people joining us, and this is going to be, I think, a very nice way to gather. We'll be gathering every week until maybe we might have a day or two off as we go if something comes up. But otherwise, I think we'll proceed over, I suspect, a number of months. And so let us begin. We'll start with a prayer and then a chant. And I've used this chant. I'm going to play this chant. Night has flown, dawn has come. Now, of course, that's actually literally true for me, where I'm broadcasting from Ananda village. But in a sense, it's the theme of the very first quatrain of the Rubaiyat. And so awake is what Omar Khayyam is saying, awake. And I think this is what all the great saints and masters who come are saying to us, to awake. It's time to get busy and find God. For those of you who just joined us during our meditation, this is the book study, weekly book study that will address the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And I'd like to explain the format that I'd like us to use this first week and maybe the first couple of weeks, and we'll see how it goes. And then from there, we'll adjust, and I think it'll naturally take its own evolution. And also this first week, we may make a little slow progress, because I want to give a little background about this work, you could say, of this. It's been a timeless poem that was written by Omar Khayyam. And when I first heard of the Rubaiyat, I was probably like many of you, if you'd heard about it, certainly here in the West where I grew up, it was a bit obscure to me. There were references to it. And, if you go to school and education, go to college, you hear references it in some roundabout way, literature classes, but certainly to actually study it and read it, I doubt if there are many people that actually do read the Rubaiyat in this day and age. But nevertheless, you do hear snippets of it from time to time. People will quote quatrains from it or parts of quatrains from it, and you hear it and you don't really realize even where those are coming from until you start reading in the Rubaiyat and say, hey, I recognize that. It's kind of, certainly in America, it's kind of like Shakespeare. you hear these phrases that that you never know where it came from. You say, "Oh, look, Shakespeare's using that common phrase I heard." Well, you don't realize it was Shakespeare who invented the common phrase, and then you come to realize, oh, now I understand. And so it is somewhat a little bit with the Rubaiyat. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I want to go over the format that we might use commonly from week to week, because I say this because I think this week we have a few quote unquote volunteers that Blasey has told me that we have. I don't know if you really volunteered or she just picked you to say something. But each week as we go forward, we would like to get some quote unquote volunteers if we have to assign to, and we'll work our way through the audience here, those who participate. So I don't want to drive you away, but, but sooner or later, I would hope all of us will participate in this, because I do stress this word participation. This makes it much more fun if there's active participation. And also, if you have comments, of course, and also if you have questions, and but we also have to realize that our time is limited and we have to keep our comments and questions short, and so that everybody has a chance to participate. And so we'll go forward and we'll see. Now, oftentimes I find it's hard to get people to speak up, and so that's why we're going to have to maybe assign people to ask questions and comment. But let's see. Now, so what we're going to do is, as we have the Rubaiyat, I hope you all should have a book, because it's hard to do a book study without having the book. Now, as we go forward, you'll notice that this is Swami has broken down in this into quatrains. And by the way, Rubaiyat is the translation of the word Rubaiyat, means quatrain from the Persian. And so I'd like whoever's volunteered for that particular quatrain to read the quatrain, and then also to read, there you'll see on the opposite page, the paraphrase. And read that, read the one and then the other. And then I would like you, whoever is doing that, I'd like you to, in a few sentences, tell us, what did he say? Put it in your own words, not parroting what you read, but saying, what did Omar say and what did Master say? Or either maybe or both, one or both, so that if you were to hear this quatrain repeated to you, say, oh, I think this is the message of that quatrain. So, but you keep it short. Now, if you'd like to say something more, that's perfectly fine too, but at least say that. And then we'll open it up to a commentary from others. And there's also a section that follows, you see, as you turn each page from one quatrain to the next, there's a section there, and this is a hint to those of you who are going to sum up the quatrain. Master sums it up in the expanded meaning. And so you might say, use what he says to sum it up, but in your own words, in your own words. And then, of course, I found it very interesting in reading each one. I gained a sense of what was trying to be said there by looking at the keys to the meaning, the symbolism that is being offered for each of these readings. And if you read that, it'll give you an idea of what Omar and Master are trying to say here. And then following that, there's the editorial comment. This may or may not apply. Sometimes you might say it's an aside that Swami offers, and we don't need necessarily to cover that. But sometimes the aside gives a little bit of an insight. And if anybody finds that helpful to say, oh, by the way, Swami said, and I found that helpful, Certainly we can discuss that, but it's not always necessarily pertinent. Sometimes it's a little bit obvious and it doesn't need to be brought out. But let's follow that. And I mentioned that now because the first volunteer or two may want to be thinking about what they're going to say. So, but before we do that, let's just review a little bit about this Rubaiyat, this work. And who was Omar Khayyam? Now, Omar, he was born in the middle of the, you could say he was born in the middle of that would be the 12th century, the 11th century. He was born 10 something or another in the middle, 1060s, somewhere in that area of 1050s, 60s. And he died because it's a little uncertain of when he was born, but he died, it's fairly well established, in 1123. And he was Persian in born in the city of Nishapur, where he had spent much of his life. And he's renowned. History remembers him still, not only for the Rubaiyat, but he's remembered particularly for his astronomical observations and his certain observations about mathematics, because that was you could say, his day job. He was the court astronomer, and he was the court mathematician, and he was the patron. He was patronage by the Sultan, was given him. The ruler supported him in those endeavors. And so he was a well-regarded and learned and educated man in that time. And but he was a poet as well. So you could say he was a well-rounded man. And history classifies him as a Sufi poet. Although I read, interestingly, that some Sufis, scholars, don't consider him a Sufi. And the interesting reason why is because he was not orthodox. And I found that, to me, Omar Khayyam went up in my estimation when I heard that he wasn't orthodox, because he didn't fit into the normal box of what you might say modern day religion or a sect or Sufism would describe. And I say that as he went up in my estimation is because oftentimes a true master is somebody who goes outside the box and has a broader view, whereas the orthodox view tends to be a more narrow historical interpretation of a certain line of thinking. And so some scholars don't think of him as orthodox, and probably he wasn't, because he was basing his poem of the Rubaiyat upon direct perception. And if you read the interpretation of Master, you can see, and as from that perspective, he was truly a great soul. He was one who was basing his commentaries on direct perception. And of course, he was seeing this as not what is commonly viewed. Certainly in the West, you hear of the Rubaiyat as a worldly poem, a hedonistic poem, even of a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and in a very outward sense. But if you turn that around and look at it inwardly, you'd see that actually he was, as have many poets, spoken in that way. It's a love poem to God. And he was addressing that poem not so much to God, although some of the quatrains do. He was addressing it to the listener, because you see this theme that comes up in this first quatrain of awake, wake up, something more is happening here in this world. Wake up, time, and this is a theme he says again and again, time is short and it's slipping by. Wake up, it's time to awaken, go within, to enjoy the wine of realization, the wine of divine love. And so it's in this symbolism that he uses, which can be interpreted very outwardly. But after a while, if you take that view, you wonder, why does he take so long? He just repeats himself in different ways. And that outward worldly view just doesn't make sense. If it was a short poem, maybe you could say that. But in a long poem such as this, it's if one has a little bit of perception, and sometimes it's not always symbolic. He's very direct in a few points at a few times. If we look at it from that perspective, we see that this was something more is being addressed here. And this is what Master brought out in his interpretation. And it had never occurred to me that such was the case until I read that Paramahansa Yogananda had addressed it in this way. And he was basing his interpretation. Master did not read Persian or speak Persian, but he was basing his interpretation on the English translation of the Rubaiyat by Edward Fitzgerald. Now, Edward Fitzgerald he translated it and put it into English in the middle of the 19th century, 18 something or another. And he did it a number of times. He had, I believe, 4 published versions of his translation. And Master said the first one was the best. He said, and it's often the case, the first glow of inspiration is often the highest. And then he tried to refine it in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th edition, but Master said it wasn't nearly as good. So Master uses that first edition, that first translation of Fitzgerald's. Now, Fitzgerald also did a very lovely translation of the Bhagavad Gita as well, and it's still one of the nicest. And often when you hear in English the translation of the Bhagavad Gita, often what is used, because it's the most poetic in English, is his translation of Edward Fitzgerald's of the Gita. So he was a wonderful poet, and he put this into English in a very poetical sense. And it would be interesting if you could read and understand Persian. I imagine it's old Persian. It would be interesting to see it in that sense as well. But he was speaking from a higher, Omar was, from a higher plane. But even unfortunately, Fitzgerald, he had inklings that there was a higher meaning to it, but he still thought of it as in a worldly way. But even he thought, well, something else is going on here. But he didn't have a clue, particularly. From maybe a few of the more obvious ones, he thought, yes, I could see. But as we read, and I'm sure if you've read this, you thought, wow, that's obscure, many of the symbolisms. But there's some of them, like wine being the joy of spirit and ecstasy, God intoxication, the garden, meaning the garden of our inner spiritual realization. And he starts out at the tavern, the inner silence, the cup, that bodily cup of our own life and consciousness. You could see that these make some symbolic sense. You can say, oh, I understand that. But then again, there's this many references here to historical figures. Jamshid, I had no idea who that was, but he was a ruler of Afghanistan in past centuries. But he's a symbol of power, but it's also symbol of the soul, and sometimes because he uses these symbols in multiple ways. It's not always inwardly consistent. But then you would have to, some of the obvious ones can be understood, but then there's these mystical ones. The 7-ringed cup. Now, what is a worldly man or woman to make of that? Pretty hard to understand. But the mystic would realize he's speaking of the inner spine, the 7 chakras, the 7-ringed cup, and so on, like this. The bread, man does not live by bread alone, life force, energy of the body. So these, those symbolisms come into play as well. But Master saw beyond the outer, and he translated or put his interpretations in an early magazine that he put out called Inner Culture. And I believe it was in 1930s, 1937 to 1944, I think, in the week or the weekly or monthly magazine of Inner Culture. He put his interpretations, and this has come from that. And so let us begin. And I'm going to call on our first volunteer, who and Blazy is our moderator here. So Blazy, I ask you to call on our first volunteer and have him or her, I believe, read. And as we've just said, read first the quatrain and then Master's interpretation, and then give me in their own words, what did he say? And then let's go from there. And then once we get into that, then I'll open it up a little bit more general questions after that. So who's first?
Okay, Jagdish.
Okay. I got to find you. Wave your hand on my screen here so I can see you. Okay, there you are. You're over there, four squares over to my right. Okay, your turn.
Jaya, it's been a while. It's very good to see you and
Yes.
all my joining tonight. Quite a pleasure, quite a treat to be here with all of you. So, quatrain 1. Awake, for morning in the bowl of night has flung the stone that puts the stars to flight. And lo, the hunter of the east has caught the Sultan's turret in a noose of light. Would you like me to read the paraphrase right away?
Yeah, well, it's up to you. You can read it as long as, you get it in there somewhere. But you can put it in your own words first if you wish to.
Sure. Because if one were to read the paraphrase, yes, then one would have, I think, completely, immediately at least, a deeper, more spiritual understanding to this. And the comment that I would like to make, and what I think this is, if I'm kind of rewinding myself to, before I knew what Master said and what Swamiji observed. What I read here was, my interpretation of it was very worldly. Somehow a warrior somewhere from the east has conquered this land, has conquered it so well that he has, captured the Sultan's turret, which is a tower in a castle. My gosh, this must be such a formidable warrior indeed. And we can come back to this comment later, but I think it's so suggestive of how this poem was so misinterpreted for so long, because my gosh, even with like the first thing that he mentioned, right? I think to the average person, it already suggests such a like worldly pursuit or worldly battles. It's it flings a stone, it captures the tower. But before I get to the paraphrasing, because I think we all, after your wonderful explanation, Jaya, has come to an understanding that this is in fact going to be a very much deeper delving into spirituality. I think he lays the groundwork quite nicely in terms of like, hey, I'm about to give you quite a topsy-turvy look at what you think the world is about, because when obviously when we think of up above, we think of stars, right? And then Earth is down below. But if you read the keys to the meaning, which is by page 4, which is on page 4, by the way, the stars is falsely attractive material desires, and the stone is delusion shattering acts of spiritual self-discipline. I mean, how surprising is that, right? He's literally using what's above is below and what below is above, and 2 lines later comparing a news of light, something ethereal, high and quite elevated, to capture the turret, again built from stones. I think what he is suggesting, what Omar is suggesting, is that I'm about to turn everything upside down, so be prepared. So the paraphrase is, thus sang the inner silence, forsake your sleep of ignorance, awake, for the dawn of wisdom has flung into the dark bowl of your unknowing the stone of spiritual discipline, that weapon of divine power that can break the bowl and put to flight the paling stars of earthly desire. Behold, wisdom, the hunter of the east, has cast a noose of light to encircle the kingly minaret of your egoic pride. Wisdom to free you at last from the long night of spiritual ignorance.
That is a wonderful opening, by Omar, and you too. Thank you very much for that. Now, let's now, Blesi, I'll let you do this in future, but let's let a few people, if they want to raise their hand and make any comment on that, but they have to keep the comment short, though.
Okay. Good evening, Jayaji. So beautiful to see you again, even though not in person. So we really miss you, all of us. So I think I have it in the phone since I don't have the book as yet. But definitely, thus sang the inner silence. Okay, so it's just rotating one video. Thus sang the inner silence. So I think what he wants to say is his voice spoke. A voice from inside of him spoke. In the next sentence, forsake your sleep of ignorance and awake. So because his silence spoke, he wants to share it with everyone and not just keep it inside himself in his tavern. And that's why he's making us like an exclamation, awake, which means he wants to like wake up others. Hello, get up, get up. I mean, I'm going to share what I got with you also, not just keep it to myself. Forsake your sleep of ignorance. In that sometimes he refers to it as the dark bowl of your ignorance. So that dark bowl, he refers to the ignorance also. Then for the dawn of wisdom has flung into the dark bowl of your unknowing the stone of spiritual discipline. So I feel that he's saying that get more into your spiritual sadhana, get so high and so well into it that that is able to fling like a stone all your desires and all your materialistic stuff. He's able to, you yourself are able to let go of your materialistic things very easily, like just a fling. Then the next sentence, I think, weapon of divine power that can break the bowl and put to flight the paling stars of earthly desires, which again, those stars mean the desires, which we are just supposed to relinquish by getting into our sadhana and following self-discipline. Behold, wisdom. And then you come up, because once you've already practiced your sadhana for a long time and you have come to some pinnacle wherein he realizes, behold, wisdom there. Okay, look, I can see wisdom now in the face, in my eyes. And the hunter of the east has cast a noose of light to encircle the kingly minaret of your egoic pride. So it's not he who has done it. It is he's giving the entire credit to the hunter of the east. And he feels, okay, the hunter of the east has come. He's helping me to remove all these desires and is sort of peel by peel, he's trying to enlighten me and unfolding my own wisdom out and bringing it to the light. And then he's encircling me with this light. And after he encircles, he sort of, they explain about the turret. So which is like the topmost part of the body. So the topmost part of the body is sort of, I mean, your Sahasrara chakra. So he encircles you, right, your entire being right up to your Sahasrara, from which you can take off. I mean, I think so. The noose of light to encircle your egoic. Okay. And then wisdom to free you at last from the long night of spiritual ignorance. Long night, I think, refers to so many of our incarnations, haven't we? We've come so far already.
She told that. I mean, that was, I think you've set everybody back a little bit, because that was magnificent. I think everybody's now going to be intimidated. That was wonderful. That was a great analysis of what you did. Now I'm going to come back to Jagadish to sum this one up, and then if anybody else wants to add anything, we can do that after this. Jagadish, sum up what we've just read in maybe 2 sentences. Now that's not as easy as that might seem, but sum it up into, if somebody says, what's the first quatrain say? Sum it up in 2 sentences.
But if I were to try, it would be meet the challenge of your spiritual calling.
Well, that's good. That's one sentence. That's good. You even did better than 2.
Your spiritual calling, or destiny is calling you. Rise, I suppose.
There you go. That's good. Let's just leave it at that. And I think that's what he's saying is, wake up. Something's calling us from, deep within ourselves. Now, if there's anybody would like to make another additional comment, then we'll go forward with you. And I think, Jagdish, are you on number 2 also? Okay, then but first, anybody like, okay.
Yeah,
I'll leave it to Blizzy to be the moderator.
Yeah, I'd like to speak, Blizzy.
Yes.
Good evening to everyone, Jayaji. I think I'll sum it up by saying the noose of light has, like Sheetal just said, I think it's more about ego transcendence, because that's what we're all looking for. If you really want to get into the spiritual consciousness, I think that is what we have to do. I mean, do away with our egoic pride. So ego transcendence, I think I'll put it like that, more or less. I don't know.
If I have to add, Jayaji, I also felt because being a saint, he's a messenger for God. Omar is, it reminded me a little bit like the first aphorism of Patanjali. Now we come to the study of yoga. It's like philosophies behind, it's time to wake up, break the delusion. And interestingly, he's coming from the East, and Master is then explaining that the East is the forehead. The East is also where, traditionally the wind of wisdom comes from. So I thought that's also very clear right there in the first line. Master explains that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Or if not, we'll go to the next one. Yes, Salvaraji.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening to all of you. Sir, Omar is an obscure poet. So outwardly, we see the meaning of this. Awake, the night has gone, and the sun has come, all the stars have gone. That is the outward meaning. Generally, the people who are not in the spiritual path, they will look like that. So that is why he was misunderstood. That's what I feel, by the other people who said he's a hedonist or something like that. But the inner meaning, which was very well explained by Madam Sital, and that gives that it was a spiritual advancement where the egoism which halts the progress in life. So awake, you come out of the ignorance of delusions of material desires and follow the true spiritual path, which was all along been controlled by your ego. You shut down your ego and come to the spiritual path. That's what I want to explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvarajji.
Thank you. So outward meaning is something, and inwardly this is as explained by Shrita.
Yes, it's good to hear so many facets of the quatrain. We'll go on to the next one now. Jagdish, would you like to?
Yeah, let's do. I think we're only going to get 2 done this week, but but we've set the stage for the future for the next one. So, Jagdish, we'll try again. And what's the next one?
So quatrain 2, if you want to open to page 7 with me. Dreaming when dawn's left hand was in the sky, I heard a voice within the tavern cry, awake, my little ones, and fill the cup, before life's liquor in its cup be dry. So if I were to read this, and not to sound like a broken record, it seems really challenging not to take a very hedonistic view, and it makes complete sense why this poem was so misunderstood for so long. And given that the environment that Omar wrote it in, right? I mean, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Islam was founded like in the 7th century. And as you pointed out, he was born in the 11th century, so well established. And the Quran pretty much was very clear with their views on intoxicants. And I mean, this could go on for quite a while, whether it be liquor or intoxicants. Are they talking about alcohol? But of all the imagery that he shows, tavern and liquor, to the average person then, it would seem to be quite a leap if you were to read that it suggests something else. And especially now, right, when you don't tend to necessarily think that that alcohol is a drug, it's almost like a social requirement among some people. So that would be my interpretation of it. And please let me read the paraphrase for you. Not yet fully wakened from my sleep of delusion, and still only dreaming of the dawn of wisdom, I heard in the silence a soul call from within the tavern of intuition. Awake, my little undeveloped thoughts. Fill your consciousness with the wine of bliss ere the life force vanishes from your cup of material existence. Did you want me to do that in 2 sentences right away?
Well, I mean, then you can just basically, if when and if necessary, just sum it up in common language. But I think you did that fairly well. You know what you're saying. So we could probably just go and get some commentary on that. So Blazy, if you want to call on somebody.
Lata, Shishi?
I didn't know this was random calling, lazy.
Well, and especially if you're following Shital's example, you're really in trouble.
I'll just make some general comments, not specific to this quatrain. One is, I feel the earlier quatrains are all talking about, waking up. It's like, if you're the really lazy kind, what I was earlier, you'd need to be shaken many times before you wake up. So what he's doing in all of these quatrains is essentially telling people to wake up, to get out of their comfort zone or wherever lethargic zone they are in, and essentially get ready for the journey that lies ahead. The other thing, we are talking about the common people thinking it's about a worldly kind of poem. Why it is not is because this is early morning and not many taverns open that early in the morning, I suppose. So this is not really what you think it is. It is actually, that's the time when all the drunks actually are fast asleep, and that's the time when they go to sleep, early morning. So this is not the regular tavern. It's a different kind of tavern, and it's a different kind of intoxication. So that is just what I'd like to say right now.
That's I think all of these early ones, I think a couple of themes are going, he brings out in this one particularly. He says, time is passing. Time is passing. And he's going to come back to this again and again and again. It's almost like, somebody who's trying to shake us and say, wake up, wake up, wake up. It's, if you don't, you're going to sleep through this life. And I think there's going to be a certain repetition of that theme as we go forward in these quatrains. And so we have a little bit of time left. Let's now, I think we assigned 2 to each of the first ones. Okay, so who is the next one? And then we'll take the third quatrain, and then we'll wrap it up today. So what's the number 3?
Okay, number 3 is myself, Jayaji.
Oh, you. Oh, we can really grill her now. Let's.
Let me just open up so I'm having a bad throat, so please excuse my.
Oh gosh, it's not good when you start with excuses.
So quatrain 3 reads, and as the cock crew, those who stood before the tavern shouted, open then the door. You know how little while we have to stay, and once departed may return no more. So like we have been discussing in the earlier quatrains, Jayaji, as you mentioned, that this idea that he is again and again, awakening within us, that time is short, it's fleeting, wake up. And the tavern, the inner silence that is called, so something that I have been trying to also feel through these quatrains is also looking at them as revelations. So here he's saying, and as the cock crew, those who stood before the tavern shouted, open then the door. That through our spiritual journey, as we practice, a higher consciousness moving in a higher direction, that brings with that triggers within us, or that awakens within us a certain momentum where you get to that point in your consciousness where the devotee's aspiration or the ambition, I want to get there. I want to see that, I want to be in the light always, open the door. That perseverance, that insistent soul call, that is a fruit of wisdom that is awakening within us. And so I think that this is important here, that a grace, the power and grace of God, along with the devotee's own aspiration and self-effort, is what eventually brings us to that point where we are able to hold on and stay at that door and say, open, open, open. I was reminded of the story of the master and his friend meditating through the night to see Lord Krishna. And his friend was not able to stay up through the night, and he repeatedly would tell master, Krishna is not coming, let's go back to sleep. And just, towards the morning, the friend gave up. And master said, no, I'm going to continue meditating till Krishna comes. And a few hours later, master saw Krishna. And so I think sometimes these moments where we can just persist, just give it one more try, I think it's very crucial for that voice of wisdom also to continue in that to continue in its encouragement and striving. How little while we have to stay, and once departed may return no more. That when we have this understanding our priorities fall in place. That without that understanding, I think we like to play, we like to fool around. So, it's I think how he interweaves this, and it's also a question mark in my mind here when he says, when he talks about the voice of wisdom. Is he also referring to, this is an open question also for the group, is he referring to the grace of God? Where does that voice of wisdom come from? At what point does it come from? Not everybody can wake up and say, hey, I want God. So I think he's already, while it is a call to all our brothers and sisters, knowing that we are all sisters and brothers in the light, it's very few will be able to respond to this call. And for us to be able to respond to the call, we too have to have come till a certain point in the journey. Otherwise, we would not find meaning in awake, or rather, we would find, how would I put it? We would find a different meaning to awake. People use the same understanding that life is too short, it is fleeting, to enjoy life in a completely different octave. So, so it's very interesting that it's important that the voice of wisdom, that power, that grace of God, and our own aspiration, our own experiences, I think eventually steer us in that direction. And probably that's also a voice of wisdom that is being referred to here, because we start with that, and with the call of intuition, that hunch, that gut feeling that we often get, even with mundane things, is also along with spiritual aspiration in everything we do in life. I think we will find this phrase very relevant, that when we are at the fag end of the process and beginning to give up, it's also telling us, continue that journey, stay, open that door, keep persevering. And you don't want to make that same journey again. You have come this far, go further, don't go behind, don't go backward. So I think probably these are also directions of thought that I want to put forward with the group.
Well, then why don't you then conclude with reading the paraphrase?
So yes, the paraphrase, Yogananda ji says, and as the cock crow of wisdom heralded the divine dawn, many devotees waiting at the door of inner silence stirred and began shouting, open, open up. So little time we have in this earth life to reap the harvest of true wisdom. When death comes to claim us, may we never more be forced to reincarnate, dragged earthward by the heavy anchor of our material desires.
Okay, one last thing. Put that into 2 sentences. What did he say?
He says that...
well, that's 1 sentence.
No.
I'm
Is this value?
I'm teasing you. No, 2 sentences.
He says, this moment is precious. Use it towards God freedom.
Thank you, Blazy. That was wonderful. That was excellent. Now, I'm not going to open it up further, and we'll come back next week and proceed, because it's 8 o'clock, and I like to keep this, right. And so you can see, this is generally we can use a format similar to this, but I'm sure that we'll probably find our own way here in the weeks ahead. We only made 3, and so I suspect we'll see. Maybe that's enough. Let's see what happens in the weeks ahead. Now, I think we have volunteers for the next 3, but Blazy, you may want to then pick a few more volunteers, just in case we're going to go beyond 3 next week, because I think we will, because we won't have quite so much of a long introduction next week. And so I have a few more on hand, and I've left it to Blazy to be our recipient of those who like to volunteer. And if you don't, she's going to have to pick some folks. So we'll make our way through everybody, I hope. And then maybe again and again, we'll go around and round. So, okay. So, okay. Thank all of you very much for joining us. And I think this could be fun. And until next week, let's meditate on this. And if you have I saw Sheetal has it. You have it at least on the computer. You have to have it in some format or else you won't know what we're talking about, whether it's on electronic or whether it's on paper, or perhaps there's even PDFs that could be shared. I'm not sure. Anyway, God bless all of you, and I look forward to seeing all of you next week for the continuation of the Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam.
Uh,
Thank you.